Post Audit Committee and remind you to turn your mics on and to put your phones on silent or turn them off, please. I'd also like to thank the Kansas Contractors Association for lunch this afternoon and for the Vice Chairman for putting that together. Thank you very much. Committee will go ahead and get started. I'll recognize Bob North from the Department of Commerce. Long time no see. I think it's been 20 minutes since I've seen Bob testifying in front of committee. Welcome.
Is that better? Okay. So I've got 12 programs I'm going to try to cover today, and I know we've got a limited amount of time, so I'm going to move relatively quickly, and at the chair's discretion, I can take questions as we go or questions at the end, just however you want to do it. So last year was a good, successful year for the Kansas Department of Commerce, the state of Kansas as a whole in terms of business development. We've got 255 successful projects last year. That's about 1,200 new and retained jobs and about $3 billion in capital investment. And keep in mind, those are, by the time the project's completed, they will have made that capital investment. On the next slide, there's a kind of a heat map of the state of Kansas. It shows the counties where we've done projects. It's also got information about other touch points between kind of the Commerce Department, its programs, and the counties across the state. So that's pretty interesting slide as well. Most of you know, probably all of you know, incentives are only one factor in a company's decision to either locate in Kansas, to stay in Kansas, to expand in Kansas. The primary other factors that companies take into consideration are quality of life, business environment, labor and talent. Can I get the workers I need? Do they have the skills that I need? Can I get them trained to do the functions that I need done? We've got the cost of doing business, wages, taxes, utilities, property cost, infrastructure. Do we have adequate roads, flights, railroad service, other infrastructure needs, and then industry linkage, which is when you would see clusters of kind of like-minded businesses. The first program I'm going to cover is the PEAK program, that is promoting employment across Kansas. It is our kind of primary bread and butter incentive program. We use it quite frequently. It is based on companies that create net new jobs to the state. So these companies are allowed to retain up to 95% of the withholding taxes generated by those new jobs. They can retain that withholding for a period of from 5 to 10 years, depending on the wage that the company pays and how that wage correlates to the county wage in which the company is located. The higher wage you pay relative to other employers in that county, the longer term you're going to get to receive PEAK benefits. So last year, $1.2 billion in total payroll generated by the PEAK participants, $55 million in Kansas individual income tax withholding. Companies retained about 36% of that 51 million. So that's, you can tell, that is certainly less than the 95% that is authorized by the PEAK program. Companies have the option of either retaining that withholding, meaning that they don't pay it into the Department of Revenue, or they can get a refund. So they would pay it into revenue when they file their tax return. They would get a refund for the PEAK benefits. 28 new agreements in 2023. 2,200 peak jobs, 132 million in direct annual payroll, $580 million in projected capital investment. So those 28 new peak projects brings us to 228 aggregate total active peak agreements, 33,000 peak jobs hired or retained, $2.5 billion of direct payroll, and $5.5 billion in capital investment. The next several pages on the handout are kind of individual peak project details. I'm not going to go over those. They run from Allen County to Wyandotte County, so we've got peak projects all across the state. Next is the High Performance Incentive Program, which is an investment tax credit where companies can receive 10% of their eligible capital investment for that year. In order to qualify, a company has to, again, pay a higher wage within that county, and we did 63 initial project certifications. Last year, we did 357 recertifications. Companies that earn HPIP tax credits have 16 years to actually claim those credits against a tax liability. So the reason you see a disproportionate number of recertifications is because a company that earned a credit 10 years ago needed to be recertified in 2023 in order to claim a credit against the Kansas tax liability. Estimated capital investment for FY 2023, $7.2 billion. We have the ability now, thanks to the legislature, to allow companies to transfer some of these HPIP credits, and that's relatively new. They can transfer up to 50% of their tax credits. So if you're a company that makes qualifying capital investment, you're not profitable, you're a startup or what have you, those credits are going to be valuable to you because you can transfer them to another company that does have a tax liability. So 2023, we saw 15 tax credit transfers, and the amount that was transferred was $6.1 million. Again, HPIP is a statewide program. There's a list of projects there. Again, I'm not going to cover those, but they cover the entire state. Next is the Rural Opportunity Zone program, which was introduced in 2012. It is intended to attract new residents and new employees to rural counties of the state, which have presumably incurred population loss at a higher rate than some of the other areas. ROZ consists of two kind of programs. One is the income tax credit, where the county, the ROZ county, can provide a 5-year, 100% personal Kansas income tax credit for qualifying new or returning residents. To be eligible, you must have lived out of state and had less than $10,000 in Kansas-sourced income over the last 5 years. And then the other component is the student loan assistance, where the state, along with a local unit of government or other local entity, provide up to $3,000 a year for up to 5 years to defray a participant's student loan payments. There are some metrics associated with the ROZ on page 27. So over the course of the program, we've had 4,200 or so applicants. We've got 2,100 participants. 600 people have completed the program. You get this benefit for up to 5 years on the student loan side, unless you pay your student loan off early or fortuitously if your student loan payment was forgiven. That would also exit you early from the 5-year period. you can see again, on slide 27, it's got the number of, on the tax credit side, it's got the number of filers and the average tax credit that each of those filers would have received. There's also on the next page a map of ROS counties, and as you can see, ROS has expanded over the years from the number of counties where it started, and now the majority of the state is eligible to participate in ROS.
Mr. North, we do have a couple of questions. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have questions for the overall at the end, but I also had some questions about your first item. Is that all right? Okay. So I do have our transparency website pulled up as well, so I want to hit that. But when we're talking about the PEAK program, is there any way to differentiate if a Kansas income tax filer has already filed income tax in Kansas the previous year and now they are shifted to a new job? So is there any way to differentiate, that little aspect on that?
Could you say that again?
Yes.
Differently a little bit. I'm not quite tracking.
Yeah. So if they're going to get credit for their income tax, right? It's a payroll tax, and if they're already a Kansas taxpayer and they file income tax, and they just change jobs and they move to an employer that actually receives the benefit, is there any way to know what percentage of that benefit already existed prior? They were already paying their taxes in terms of that employer withholding.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is if an employee worked for a different company 2 years ago, then went to work for a company that was participating in PEAK, and then so the act of moving from a non-PEAK company to a PEAK company, then yes, they're theoretically, if their job had the appropriate wage level, then that withholding would be remitted back to the PEAK company. And I'm hoping I'm understanding your question.
Yes, I think, and our chair will better probably be able to express my question, but really the reality is that particular income tax filer had hopefully a job, and I wanted to distinguish between was their job out of state or was their job in Kansas. And if it was just that they moved from one place in Kansas to another place, and they were able to, that employer was able to receive that withholding benefit, what percentage just shifted from? So I guess really bottom line is, of those that are receiving benefits, what percentage of those were already contributing as Kansas filers?
So Representative Williams, it's a great question, and it's very similar to what Senator Reddy asked during the Commerce Committee, in the fact of, are these creating competition between businesses within Kansas, or is it actually drawing from individuals, as you're stating, moving into the state? And she wanted to know if it's creating competition between other businesses. I think both of those questions are critical to understand about this program. So would you be able to get that information to us?
We can certainly investigate. It's going to be really like logistically difficult to track. We'd have to get individual employees' Social Security numbers and track them one by one with their previous employment. So we can look into that and try to come up with a methodology that might work. It's an interesting question. So appreciate that.
Representative Williams.
And sure, you could also have the business entities, when they're filing that for the withholding tax, they would be able to, could be something as simple as how many of those equate to Kansas filers. They were Kansas residents prior, they had a Kansas income tax prior. And secondly, thank you, Madam Chair, Chairwoman, because it does say in the statute that any other information or analysis specified by the committee, and I think that would be very helpful. And then just the last comment, and I know I've worked with Chris on this before, but, and it could be cookies, but I went on the transparency database to try to find just random options or random companies, and over I would find whole sections missing. I couldn't find them on the database. And that was for all kinds, and I marked up my page that I could give to Chris and she could look at that were missing. In addition to that, in the statute, the database is supposed to show how many years they are receiving their benefits or what year. And there is something in the, large database, but it's unclear how it's labeled. And so, maybe just taking a look at that and making sure that just the average person in the public could read that without having to, spend too much excess time.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Representative. And I would also remind, how many years has it been since we passed that legislation for the database to be online? 2019, I've been told. So thank you, Representative. Those are excellent points. It's 4 or 5 years now to put up a website. So I would question that. Senator Warren.
Where?
Where? I'm sorry. I looked right at you and said Warren. Senator Ware.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the second time I've had the benefit of seeing your presentation today. So I'm struck as we go through these how big and how popular the PEAK program is. I know that I've heard it referred to as the bread and butter. What makes it so popular? What makes it so compelling for businesses?
Right. Well, there's a 2 or 3 things that I think make it a successful program. One is we're not asking the state of Kansas to write a check to anybody, right? The funding for PEAK comes from net new income to the state of Kansas, right? So we're not having any adverse effect on the state general fund because companies are allowed to retain a portion of their withholding tax on these new jobs. So it's kind of a eat what you kill program, right? It's got a, you could assume that, well, all these companies are going to come anyway, and then there would be a cost, but we know that's not true. So I think that's a big part of it, and it's targeted. It's net new jobs. So we're not giving away benefits for companies that are, if you hire 10 new people, we'll incent those 10 jobs, but we're not going to incent your existing employee base. So it's targeted to net new jobs, and that was if you look at the goals of the program, that's what was intended. So I think there's a variety of reasons it's successful, and like I said, it's our predominant incentive program. Thanks.
Representative Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as you were talking about that, so let's talk about National Beef Packing, which is in my community. How do you, let's say they do a major expansion in one area of their plant, like add a big new freezer that's very automated and everything. And they say because of that, they're going to add 25 jobs. But as a result of that automation and improved productivity, they wind up cutting 15 jobs somewhere else in the plant. Is that factored into the PEAK program, or is it just for the expansion?
No, it's a good question, and that is factored into the PEAK program. So we look at a company's base employment, how many numbers of jobs they had at the time they would enter the PEAK program, and we incent the new jobs. But if you hire 25 jobs in one division and then you lay off 100 people in the other division, you're not going to have any net new jobs upon which to receive a PEAK benefit. So the company would not be able to participate to that extent.
Senator Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then how long do we kind of track that? In other words, over time, sometimes these employment levels change for various reasons. I mean, I'm just curious
Right.
about
So
5 years later.
program participation, if you're eligible for PEAK, you're going to get benefits for somewhere between 5 and 10 years. So depending upon the length of your benefit term, we would track that for that period of time.
continue, thanks.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the Job Creation Fund, which is, we call it our deal closing fund. It's a cash award, right? And we try to fill the gaps in with in recruitment or retention expansion projects with the Job Creation Fund. We don't use it a great deal. You can see on slide 30 the instances where we gave an award of JCF last year. $4.7 million was awarded, 445 new jobs proposed, 694 jobs proposed to be retained, and that leveraged $137 million in capital investment.
So I'm going to ask the questions that were asked of you earlier so you can provide it for this committee. As Coffee County, creating jobs, and also Wichita State University.
Yep. We'll get that information to the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Next, we're going to talk about a couple of our training programs. Again, I mentioned kind of briefly earlier how important training is and how that's one of the top 4 or 5 criteria that companies use when they're deciding whether to locate in Kansas, expand in Kansas, stay in Kansas. And 2 of those programs are KIT, which is Kansas Industrial Training, and the other one is KER, which is Industrial Retraining. So these, again, are pegged to new job creation, and KIT is training new employees with the skill sets that's needed for that particular company, for its production equipment, its manufacturing equipment, what have you. So you've got to create at least one new job, and you've got to pay an average wage that is equal to or greater than the median wage for that county. So again, we're not incenting all jobs, we're incenting jobs that pay a greater than higher wage. Industrial retaining is when you've got, maybe you had a line in your manufacturing plant go down, or you had a product line that's no longer being produced, so we will provide funds to retrain and reskill those employees that you've got so that they can provide other services at the company. So again, that's based on retraining at least one person, and it's typically more than that, and the wage has to be higher than median wage. So, slide 33, there's a program summary. I want to comment on the kind of the decrease in projects that you see, like comparing FY21 to FY23. That is because the legislature kind of disconnected KIT and KER from eligibility for HPIP. We found that there were a lot of companies that were participating in KIT and KER primarily to be eligible for HPIP. They needed the training and they got training, but kind of the driving factor in their receiving KIT KER was to participate in HPIP. That put a lot of unnecessary pressure on our funds for KIT and KER. We weren't getting the training dollars to those that needed it most. So that legislative tweak allows us to put more money per participant into these training programs. Moving right along, the Community Development Block Grant Program. So this is a federal grant program allocation that the state of Kansas receives, and it's administered by Commerce. It's primarily for small rural communities. The larger, the Sedgwick counties, Topeka, those communities get a direct funding from HUD, from HUD, and so we administer the funds that go to the balance of the communities. It's critical to enhance the kind of quality of place in these communities, which again, quality of life, and how are we going to keep the people that we've got in these communities? How can we attract more people? You see a lot of infrastructure improvement projects with CDBG, community facilities upgrades, housing rehab, youth job training, economic development, and that is a well-used program. It's competitive grants. We typically receive more applications than we've got capacity to fund. And you can see that last year, $11.5 million of CDBG awards. Average size of the award was roughly $320,000. There's also a slide there on CDBG-CVR, which was an extra tranche of funding from HUD to deal with COVID and some of the detrimental consequences that had on cities and communities and their own revenue sources.
So I do have a quick question on this. The question that I asked earlier in previous committee about the childcare, would you please make sure that you include all the grants and stuff that were in this program and other programs also?
Yes.
And I'll request of this committee too, so they get that information. We keep hearing about childcare throughout the state, and so I just want to make sure people have a grasp of what we've actually done for that in the last couple years. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, committee? Thank you. Oh, Senator Thompson.
I've had the same issue running my committee here
I'm
lately.
thinking first names.
I
and
look
really
at somebody
have
and
to
their
think.
name just goes right out of my head. I understand. With these CDBG programs and federal money, there's always strings attached.
Yes.
Do we have a list of what kind of requirements that these companies have to, or communities have to comply to get those grants that we could?
The list would probably be about this thick. I mean, so you've got a code of federal regulations that governs those funds. You know, they are targeted at low to moderate income communities, so there's a whole lot of work in surveying and ascertaining if your community, you know, has that, meets that low to moderate income requirement. So there are definitely strings that are attached with.
I'm just curious if those strings add additional costs to these communities to have to comply with those requirements for grants. I don't know if you know that.
I mean, I think we could assume that it takes some extra work to work your way through the application packet process that's required by HUD.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, next on our list is the Community Service Tax Credit Program. We get, this year, we got $4.1 million. It was essentially appropriated / approved by the legislature, allocated for that program. So we take those funds and work with nonprofits, primarily public health care entities, children and family services, crime prevention, youth apprenticeship or training and healthcare. And those kind of focuses of the program are set out in statute. And so that's how we look to administer these funds. So if you're in a rural area defined as less than 15,000, it's a 70% tax credit. So you give $1 to a company that's been allocated community service tax credits, you're going to get a 70% state income tax credit for that. If you're in an urban area defined as 15,000 or more, then you're going to get a 50% credit. Again, 4.1 billion overall program allocation. The most that we will award to a project is 200,000. And there is a list of the 36 CSP awards on page 41. Average award amount was about $133,000. Next, the Star Bonds program summary. So Star Bonds are a kind of a municipal financing tool to give municipalities, cities and counties, the authority to issue bonds to finance tourist attractions, tourism areas, major commercial entertainment, and similar types of projects. The idea behind Star Bonds is to bring in new visitors to Kansas, to bring in new spending from those visitors in Kansas, and increase the sales tax base in that way. And then the new sales tax that's associated with the project is used to pay debt service on the bonds that are issued to construct the attraction. So this is a partnership between the city, the state, sometimes the county, where everybody is contributing their sales tax and usually transient guest tax as well to pay for the project, pay for the STAR bonds. There's a list of projects on page 45. It's not quite large enough type for me to read it for you, but you can see it if you've got questions about any individual projects, and some of you may. Happy to talk to those. So we've also probably got 3, 4, 5 projects that we are just initiating or having initial discussions with cities and counties that are hopeful to do a STAR bond project.
So I do have a couple questions on STAR bonds. You're not surprised at all?
I'm not.
Okay. One of the things when the program went into place, it was not to compete against any existing business. In fact, there wasn't even supposed to be that type of business, I think, in the county or in the area, I know for sure. And it's gone beyond that now. We are providing this incentive for businesses, I mean, direct competition, car dealerships, restaurants, other types of businesses. Can you talk to that, please?
Sure, and that's a very, very valid concern and a valid point. Part of the feasibility study for each STAR bond project is there's got to be a market impact analysis, which is, we can talk about cannibalization, which is intended to study the effects of this STAR bond project on other businesses. There used to be a senator from southeast Kansas, and he was aware of 2 or 3 furniture stores in his community that he felt were shut down because of Nebraska Furniture Mart, right? I don't know that we've got any hard data on that. That is something that the department would have interest in, possibly as a potential topic of inquiry for this committee and legislative post-audit, right? The idea behind STAR bonds is to bring in new dollars. It's not to shift, right? It's not to shift from outside a district into a district. So a good point.
I know the committee may not be aware, there's a couple of STAR bond projects that are, as you said, to use your words, have hit a road bump. We would like to learn more about those projects and what it looks like, the obligation for the state. You've said it was a state-city relationship, how that's going to be impacted.
Right, so just real briefly, and that may be a separate conversation, but the state absolutely has no obligation on STAR bonds. They are solely the responsibility of the bond buyer. There's one project that the legislature approved, and where the legislature gave the city of Topeka the ability to pledge its full faith and credit behind those STAR bonds. That was 20-ish years ago. It was before the Department of Commerce had a role really in the STAR bond process. And I think that language was an acknowledgement that the district, which is pretty far south of Topeka, was never going to generate enough sales tax to pay the STAR bonds. So, but yes, happy to have that conversation, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And you did say 20 years ago?
I think Heartland Park was the early aughts.
No, I would say, I think that's before most of our times in the legislature, not all of us, so.
Right.
Committee, any other questions? Sorry. Seeing none, thank you.
Okay. So moving to the next program is the Angel Investor Tax Credit Program. It's a program that is intended to help startup businesses, new businesses, entrepreneurs that are seeking kind of that first round of investment and provide tax credits to those companies to help them raise capital to take that next step in the growth process. So again, we get an allocation from the legislature of this year, last year, $6.5 million, which then we award to angel companies. And then those angel companies, in turn, go market those tax credits to angel investors. And angel investors are, there's a definition. You've got to have a net worth, I believe, of over $1 million, and there's a whole list of criteria that you've got to meet to be an angel investor. So it's fairly rigorous there. And then, so you invest in this company, and you receive a tax credit for your investment, as well as presumably an equity interest in that company.
Committee, any questions?
Okay, next is the Apprenticeship Act, tax credits and grants. That law, that program became effective last July, so it's relatively in its infancy. But it's, again, apprenticeship is becoming more and more important. Companies are looking for, workers that can immediately step in and be productive. And so having them participate as participants or apprentices is a way to get them trained up and get the skills they need to be productive immediately. The program's kind of separated into 3 areas. There are tax credits for-profit businesses. There are grants to nonprofit businesses and healthcare entities. And then there's $3 million set aside for K-12 education. Total funding was $13 million. We got some numbers on Kansas residents, Internet Registered Apprenticeship Program, 4398, and then it breaks down the various types of employers that those participants are working for. Last but not least, the APEX, Attracting Powerful Economic Expansion program. We had the ability to enter into 2 agreements for APEX benefits. We've entered into an agreement with Panasonic, which is the EV battery manufacturing site, which is located in DeSoto. They have, they've got all the foundation done. They've got steel coming up. That project is taking place at a really, really rapid pace. We think they've invested, and we don't think, they've reported they invested over $320 million on site, and that would be through, I think, the middle of 2023. They are going to create 4,000 or so direct jobs. There's going to be suppliers and other indirect jobs of about another 4,000. There's going to be 16,000 construction workers on that site at some point during the construction and equipping of the project. We also have entered into an agreement with Integra, which is again, it's in the semiconductor space. It would be located in the Wichita area, and that project is awaiting notification from the federal government as to whether it's going to receive CHIPS Act funding. And if it does receive CHIPS Act funding, then that agreement will become operative, and we'll go forward with that. If it doesn't receive CHIPS Act funding, then the APEX agreement will be null and void and not operative. So far, no state incentives have been paid out because the company's not hired its employees, it's not done making its capital investment, and so we expect that employment will ramp up this summer and next fall. We believe that they'll be pushing batteries out Q1 of 2025. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so I want to kind of get an overview and ask a few questions, and then I have one specific question heading back to peak. But on page 3, we have the 2023 business development. So with the 2023 numbers of these most prominent commerce incentive programs, what would be the total amount of tax incentives offered in 2023, and what would be the total amount of tax incentives claimed in that year of these programs only?
Okay. I think we can get part of that information for you in terms of companies claiming a tax credit on their tax return, that's going to have to come from the Department of Revenue. Commerce does not see that. But in terms of peak benefits, we could certainly provide that number. We would have that information.
And I would ask, could you guys, somebody from staff, reach out to Revenue to find out that number? Thank you, Representative.
Yes, and I mean, I would think if we're offering incentives, Commerce knows the amount of the incentives offered. Whether or not they claim them on their income tax filing is another level. But we should know what Kansas is offering every single year in tax incentives. And then we should also know how much were actually claimed of that total, because there's no way for us to parse through 15 different programs or 10 different programs and try to ascertain, is this benefiting? My second question relates to, it says 255 projects, 11,952 new and retained jobs. Okay, so I went to the Kansas Labor Report, and the labor report says our total labor market from 2021, I think that was through 2022, so we're a year behind, I believe here, so I'm not sure. So we would need the latest numbers. But in that time frame, we only added 4,300 jobs. So can you, and I'm not sure if that's updated for 2023, can we get a report on if there's any comparison in the number of actual jobs created? Because what I'm reading is that that's less. Maybe it equals exactly in 2023, but 11,952, it's retained, and that's how you get away from really counting it. But I'm concerned, Madam Chair, because we get reports that we have, Kansas is the 8th most frequent state of people exiting, and yet we're supposed to be retaining and getting new jobs. Well, I'm not sure what percentage is new and what percentage is retained. Maybe that's really easy to answer.
Yeah, we can definitely get you that information. I mean, I think to your other point, I mean, there are people retiring every day. There are people moving out of state every day. There are people that, for whatever reason, decide to just not be in the labor force anymore. So I don't think there's a direct comparison between the 12,000 new and retained jobs and necessarily what the Department of Labor is going to show in terms of Kansans that are employed.
Fair enough.
I don't think there's
difficult to track, so difficult to tell its benefits too. Because if you can't track it, you can't know for sure if it's a benefit. And the only other side note I would say is that, again, if you would please check the website, because I just checked it again, and many of these are not on it. And in addition to that, if a company transfers their credits, is that automatically included on the transparency database, or are we not including that? And so and if it's active or inactive, is it maintained on the database? So there's just a lot of questions, and difficult, and also on the database, I find I think it's difficult for you to put in a company and try to, ascertain the total amount of different credits from different programs. So maybe some things that could be done to make our transparency piece more user-friendly. Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. Any other questions, committee? Senator Thompson, then Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and I echo that sentiment, because I get a lot of people who want to know who owners, and I'm talking about like the C Nano in Johnson County, where they gave a benefit to the county gave the benefit, but people have trouble. They shouldn't have to make CORA requests to find out who owns a company, what the company is, what kind of benefits they're getting. To Representative Williams' point, we should have that on a database, and it should be easily searched by company. In other words, alphabetically, or you just type in the company and it shows you they have accepted this much benefit. These are taxpayer-funded entities. So, and then the other question I have is with regard to the Apex. One of the concerns we're hearing in utilities from Evergy is that the Panasonic plant is going to be a giant energy hog. it's going to consume a lot of electricity, and the concern about the cost of that obviously eventually be passed on to consumers of electricity in that area or across the state. Was that considered when that project was proposed, and was that even part of the discussion?
Absolutely. A company's not going to build a $4, $5, $6 million facility without having assured itself that there will be adequate energy. We've kind of heard the opposite, Senator, is that the Panasonic plant is not going to cause Evergy to increase its rates. It's certainly something we're aware of and sensitive to, and hopefully we get to the point that we're kind of hearing the same feedback there, because it is going to use a significant amount of energy. Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just curious that there were no numbers other than just program outline on the angel investor tax credit. Do you kind of track those companies that you've made this investment over time? And, you know, can you just give me an overview? How long's this program been in place? And I'm sure from what I hear about angel investing that we have a lot of failures, but you're hoping for a couple of home runs. And is there any data on that?
Yeah, I think I'm guessing a little bit here, but the program goes back to when we had something called Kansas Technology Enterprise Corporation, KTAC. And so that would have been, I think, in the late 2009 or 2010, and then KTAC folded and came into the Department of Commerce. So there should be, for those companies that have been awarded angel tax credits, that information should be on our transparency database. We do track that. We survey each angel company every year to make sure it's still doing business in Kansas. We don't want you to take our tax credits and then move your production or move your operations out of state. So we follow up on those, and where it's appropriate, we try to claw back those benefits. So we can absolutely get you a list of those companies participating in it. Now, we can't get you a list of the investors because that's kind of confidential information, but absolutely we'll do that.
Yeah, I just might be interested in the amount of the tax credit that was gave to the company and current or employment growth over a appropriate time frame.
Okay.
Representative Tarwater.
And thank you, Madam Chair. Over the past few years, the legislature has made more and more tax credits transferable. Is there a way for an investor that would like to purchase those tax credits? Do we have like a database that's public on who has tax credits for sale so that we can better assist them to get more for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't believe that the Department of Commerce maintains any database like that. I mean, we've got certainly the database of companies that have HPIP credits, for example, that they've earned. I don't think we've got any way of knowing whether a company is inclined to or need to transfer some of those credits, but it's something that let us think about it and see if there's a way to connect companies with credits to sell with people that might want to acquire those.
Representative, there's actually a website you can go out to and see Kansas tax credits that are for sale being auctioned off.
Okay. Yeah, I just think it's important that the people that actually did the work to create the jobs that earn the tax credits get as much of it, keep as much of it as they can. So, thank you.
Senator Ware, and I'm going to take a minute really quickly. Bob, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I know he's got a busy schedule. We're not going to make it to the security briefing, so if you want to leave and we'll reschedule. But we appreciate everything you do. Bob's one of our IT guys, and believe me, you guys, he is top-notch. So thank you.
I was hoping you were talking to this, Bob.
Sorry. It's actually Robert Murphy, but yeah, thank you. Thank you. Senator Ware.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In light of all of the focus on workforce and the training, having qualified employees, and I've been hearing about what other states have been doing for so long, and we finally have a reasonable start on really the Kit and Kerr and the new apprenticeship program. Are these able to grow? Or do we need to think in a new direction? Or how can we maximize this effort?
Right, so I think with Kit and Kerr, we've allocated this year another $2 million of additional resource to help with those programs. And again, the act of disconnecting Kit Kerr from HPIP freed up some dollars that we can really target for training. The apprenticeship program, we probably should get another year of experience with, and because it's new, and see how that does. And I haven't talked about it today, but the state also administers the federal workforce programs, which is an additional $15–16 million. Think about the job service centers that we've got across the state. It used to be 26 or so. I don't think it's that high now, but those programs are funded with these federal dollars. So constantly looking for ways to provide that skill training. Legislature's approved some engineering-specific programs, for example, where we've got tax credits to give to schools with engineering programs that produce more than the number of graduates they had the year before. So it's an incentive to develop engineering education capacity so that we can crank out additional engineers, and then the goal is to retain as many of those engineers as we can. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Bob, and you are top-notch also, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Committee, I'll turn your attention to the consent calendar. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I will keep this very short, but on today's consent calendar, there is one item. You can find these in tab A, and attachment A are the minutes from your last meeting, which was January 17th. So without objection from the committee, that item would be considered approved.
Committee, any objection? Seeing none, thank you. Chris, would you mind on the dates?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. If you would turn to tab B in your notebook, that is the planned schedule for the next few upcoming meetings. So next week, February 7th, 2 audits, community college athletics, and Capers 3. Then we'll skip a week, and then February 21st, the 911 contractor will come back for a brief, succinct, direct presentation, hopefully, and the audit on DEI and foreign contributions at the state's universities. February 28th, we are currently doing an audit of the angel investor tax credit that Bob just spoke of, so that will be released February 28th. Perhaps that's when we could slot in security awareness training reschedule. Other than that, we don't have specific dates going forward, but there's a list of upcoming audits. And then, Madam Chair, real quick, you wanted me to touch base on the bills, status of our bills?
I did, thank you.
It'll be quick. The committee, if you recall, put out a bill, both a House version and a Senate version. The House version is 2483. It has had a hearing in House Commerce. That's my only update for the moment. And then this week, Senate Bill 411 came out. I alerted you guys to the provisions in that bill as well. That's my only update.
Thank you for the update. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, there's no other business. We're adjourned. Thank you.